Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another meal prep video. Today's video is all about meal prepping on a budget, and I'm cooking out of my favorite meal prep cookbook, which is Cook Once, Eat All Week. I've shared a couple videos with this cookbook before, so I'll link those down below if you're interested in checking them out. But I've tried a lot of different meal prep cookbooks and this one is my favorite. The premise of this cookbook is that you use the same core ingredients to create 3 meals that your family can eat for dinner throughout the week. All of these ingredients for these 3 recipes can be purchased for around $30 depending on what you have in your refrigerator and pantry. You may be able to even spend a little bit less. They all serve at least 4 to 5, so there are some good portions there, and especially if you don't have that many people in your household, you'll also be able to get some good leftovers out of them. Also, I was gonna get made up for this video, but I decided that we're all friends here, and likely you guys don't put on your makeup to meal prep either, so this is how you get me. Meal prepping on a budget with no makeup. Okay, let me show you what we're gonna make. So here's the front of the cookbook. It's Cook Once, Eat All Week by Cassie Joy Garcia. And the premise of this cookbook is that you have 3 core ingredients every week that you use to meal prep. So for example, one week she may have you use shredded chicken, broccoli, and rice. And then all of your meals that you meal prep are based off of those 3 ingredients. And this is not only more practical, but it also helps you keep the cost down because you're not buying as many ingredients. So each prep is laid out with the shopping list, and then it kind of goes into the prep step by step, and then you go into the recipes. So if you're new to meal prepping, this would be a great starter meal prep cookbook. Even if you're not new to meal prepping, it's still a great resource. I think most of these recipes can be tailored to either be paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free, low carb. She does kind of give you some guidelines over here about what to do if you want to make those dietary changes. But this week our core ingredients are ground pork, cabbage, and red potatoes. And so I'm going to show you first what the ingredients are for these recipes, and then we are going to prep chorizo and potato tacos with cilantro lime slaw. I'm so excited to taste these. An egg roll in a bowl. And lastly is the Swedish meatballs over mashed potatoes. Now, if I have time today, I'm also going to make some banana muffins, so we'll see if I have time for that. So here's everything that you'll need for these meals. The recipe, or the recipes rather, call for 5 pounds of ground pork, but I'm going to use some ground pork and some ground beef. I'm going to use the pork for the tacos and the egg roll in a bowl, and then I'm going to use the beef for the Swedish meatballs. You'll need 3 pounds of red potatoes, 1 yellow onion, some carrots, a bunch of parsley, 2 limes. The recipes call for green onions, but I have chives out on my back deck, so I'm going to substitute those instead. Some fresh garlic, butter. The taco recipe calls for cotija cheese, but we don't really care for that too much, so I'm going to use Monterey Jack instead. You also need a bunch of cilantro, some fresh ginger. I always keep mine in the freezer. Some corn tortillas. I have yellow corn tortillas just because that's what I found in the store. Some heavy whipping cream, 1 head of cabbage, some mayo, avocado oil or olive oil. You also need some sesame oil, some type of chicken broth. So whether you want to use chicken broth in a can, I like to use this chicken bouillon because I can always keep it in my pantry, or in my spice cabinet rather, and make chicken broth out of it. You'll also need some coconut milk if you want. I believe this is for use in the dressing for the tacos. I don't think I'm going to use this because I don't need to make it dairy-free, but if you did need to make it dairy-free, you'd need this coconut milk. I'm going to need rice vinegar, soy sauce or coconut aminos, and some apple cider vinegar. And then here are the spices that you'll need. I did not have to purchase any spices for this. I already had these in my cupboard. So just keep in mind, if you don't have a lot of spices on hand, you may need to purchase some of those, and that may drive your cost up a little bit. But once you build up a good spice cabinet, these will obviously last you a while, and then you can spend less at the grocery store going forward. So you'll need onion powder, some red pepper flakes, cinnamon, paprika, chili powder, some cumin, garlic powder, some dried parsley flakes, sage, oregano, and then cloves, allspice, and sesame seeds. All right, so we are going to start out this meal prep by baking a third of the red potatoes, and this is going to be for the chorizo and potato tacos. So I just have 3 of the red skin potatoes that I washed. I'm poking those with a fork. That's very important to do that. Make sure that they don't explode in the oven. I've actually had that happen before. I drizzled a little bit of olive oil on there, and I'm going to put those in a 375-degree oven for 60 to 75 minutes or until they are tender and baked all the way through. Next up, I'm going to make the mashed potatoes, and this is going to be for the Swedish meatball recipe. And so I'm taking the other part of the potatoes and I'm just going to peel them. You don't necessarily have to peel these. I know a lot of people especially with red skin potatoes, they'll just leave the skin on. I was actually going to give this particular meal, the meatballs and mashed potatoes, to my grandparents. And I know sometimes my grandma has issues with potato peeling and like high fiber things, and so in order to cater to them, I wanted to go ahead and peel them. So it doesn't take me very long. I actually don't mind peeling potatoes. So once I get all the skin off of these, I'm just going to rinse them off under cold water and then chop them up into kind of medium-sized chunks. When you're making mashed potatoes, you don't want to cut the chunks of potato too small or the potatoes will tend to get waterlogged, but you also don't want to cut them too large because then they'll take a long time to boil and the outside will get cooked before the inside gets cooked. So I kind of just try to cut them into a medium dice, and I'll put them in the pot, fill that up with water and some salt, and get that on the stove. I do get questions sometimes about these pretty blue pans that I have with the white interiors. I'll have those linked down below, as well as any other kitchen tools that I use in this video. There'll be links for those in the description box, and if I miss something, definitely leave me a comment and I will add that. All right, so now we're going to get started on the meal prep for both the egg roll in a bowl and the rest of the chorizo and potato tacos. So what's nice about this cookbook is it kind of goes step by step in what you need to do for the next step in the meal prep. And so now we're going to brown the ground pork. So if you'll remember, I actually chose to use ground beef for the meatballs, and I'm using ground pork for the egg roll in a bowl and the chorizo tacos. So I have my ground pork in my big Cuisinart skillet here. I love that for browning large quantities of large meat. It has deep sides and it does a really great job. And I'm also using my meat chopper to just get that meat into as fine of chunks as I can. I would also say you might have to drain your ground pork depending on how lean it is. I did have to drain mine just because there was a bit of grease in the bottom and I didn't want that to end up in my finished dishes. While that is cooking, I'm going to dice up my onion, and this is going to be for the egg roll in a bowl. So I just have one yellow onion here that I'm cutting into a dice. This knife that I'm using here is a new one. It's a Misen knife. I'll leave a link down below if you guys want to get 20% off. I really love this knife. I've been using it for about the past 3 weeks to a month now, and I have no complaints with it. It is super sharp, and it has done a good job for me in the kitchen. Next, I am crushing some garlic cloves, and this is going to go into the egg roll in a bowl also. You can use garlic paste or pre-minced garlic, but I seem to have quite a few bulbs of garlic in my pantry that I'm trying to work through, so I decided to use fresh. Here is some ginger. I keep this in my freezer and it grates up really well with the microplane. So here are all my sort of aromatic vegetables for the egg roll in a bowl: the onion, garlic, and ginger. And so I'm just putting those in a bowl and setting them to the side until I am ready to cook with them. Here are the potatoes. These are just about done now. I usually use a fork to kind of poke through them and check for doneness. And then here is the ground pork, and that is almost ready as well. Next step is to make the meatballs for the Swedish meatballs, and what we're going to do is go ahead and cook these in the oven, and that is the meal prep portion of this particular recipe. If you end up getting this cookbook and kind of read through, there's sort of a different way that you can approach this than me. You can choose to prep only components of the meal prep and then do most of the cooking, the night when you're going to make it. But since I was filming this for you guys and I wanted the meals to be mostly ready, I'm actually doing more of the cooking up front. So just keep that in mind. That does take a little bit longer during the meal prep day, but then obviously you'll save time during the week. I get questions sometimes about, how do you have time or how do you make time to meal prep? And, the whole principle behind that is that you're trading off time, right? So you might spend a couple hours on a Saturday or Sunday prepping these dishes, but you're also going to save time during the week. So it just depends on when you want to spend your time. And sometimes, when you get off work, especially if you work like a traditional schedule, you're just too exhausted to even think about cooking or putting together a whole meal. And so sort of doing all of the prep work when you have more time on the weekends, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a weekend, right? Like let's say if you work in healthcare or you work night shift or something like that. If you have a couple days off during the week, like a Tuesday, Wednesday, you could do your meal prep then. So to me, it's just all about trading time and when do I feel like I can be most productive in the kitchen versus when do I feel like I want to spend less time in the kitchen. So for my meatballs, there are a few spices that I mixed in there that were kind of unique. Dried parsley, sage, salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, cinnamon, allspice, and cloves. And I was a little bit skeptical about the combination, but actually tasted one of these with the gravy and it ended up being really good. So I used my cookie scoop to kind of portion these meatballs out into equal sizes, and then I just rolled them into balls. I have them on a cookie sheet that I have them on a cookie sheet that I sprayed with nonstick spray. And then I'm going to pop those in the oven. The recipe says to bake them at 400 degrees for 18 minutes until lightly browned. Okay, so my ground pork is done cooking, and while I have that draining, I'm just going to use the same skillet to saute my onion and ginger and garlic. This is for the egg roll in a bowl. You could definitely pre-chop your veggies and wait to do this the night that you were going to cook it, but I'm doing it more at the beginning, so I have less work to do during the week. So after the veggies were sauteed, I went ahead and added half of the ground pork that I had cooked back into the skillet. And then we're just going to add a bunch of seasoning and veggies to this, sort of like a traditional egg roll, filling that you would make. And actually, I did end up using this later in the week as a filling for some egg rolls, so you'll see that in an upcoming video. But I have to say, I've tried different recipes before for egg roll in a bowl, and I'm not always thrilled with them just because I'm not a huge fan of cooked cabbage. I'll eat it. It's just not my favorite thing. But this recipe was really good. I cannot recommend this cookbook enough. I've probably made over 10 recipes out of it now, and I have never had a bad recipe. I think all of the flavors are spot on. Most of the ingredients are whole foods, and a lot of them are family friendly. So definitely think about picking up this cookbook if you haven't yet. So again, with the cabbage, I'm just shredding that. My knife is making really quick work of it. Half of this is going to go in the egg roll recipe, and then half is going to go in the chorizo taco recipe for the slaw. In addition to some of the cabbage that we're going to put in the egg roll in a bowl, we also need some shredded carrots. You could definitely buy pre-shredded carrots to make this a lot quicker. I had some carrots already in my fridge and I wanted to use those up, so I went ahead and just peeled them, and then I'm going to grate them on a box grater. So here again is my pork mixture. I added the shredded cabbage to that, and then you can just cook this over medium heat until the cabbage is cooked to your liking. I don't necessarily like super crispy cabbage in cooked dishes, so I tend to cook it a little bit longer, but that's definitely up to you. This box grater I actually got from IKEA like a long time ago. I don't have a link to it, but if you don't have one of these, it's a super versatile tool in your kitchen. And if you like to shred your own cheese, it's definitely something you should have on hand. I'll link a comparable one down below on Amazon. I've looked them up before, and I think there is a Cuisinart one or an OXO one. I can't remember. That's good quality for a pretty decent price. So I added my shredded carrots to the egg roll mixture, and I'm just going to stir that around. And you only really need to cook this for a couple minutes. Obviously the carrots, since they're so small and we shredded them, don't need to cook for that long. But then after the carrots and the cabbage are added, you can add your seasonings and vinegar and oil and all of that stuff. So we're going to add some coconut aminos. I have been really liking this more than I have been liking soy sauce. Let me know if you guys have tried it. It is hard to find around here where I live, and so I usually order it from Thrive Market. But I think that it's milder and it tastes better than soy sauce. But if you have soy sauce on hand, definitely use that as well. I'm also adding some chili flakes and sesame oil and some rice vinegar, and I'm going to stir that around. You can also add salt and pepper to this, and then just go ahead and taste it and see if you think that it needs anything else. I thought that the recipe as written was perfect. Again, I am not necessarily a huge fan of egg roll in a bowl, but this one was a definite winner for me. Okay, so I just put this mixture into a big 9x13 dish to store for the week, but I also wanted to share with you guys what it looks like on the plate. This reheats really, really well. You could also do it for a lunch meal prep if you're looking for a quick option just to reheat during the week. Definitely would recommend this recipe out of the cookbook. It is fabulous, and I will be making it again sometime. Okay, so next up we're going to make the cilantro lime dressing, and this is going to be for the chorizo potato tacos. So in my food processor, I have some mayonnaise, some cilantro leaves. I actually added a few tablespoons of heavy cream because I didn't want to use the coconut milk, or I didn't want to open a whole can of coconut milk just for that. I also added the juice of 1 lime and some chives, or you could also use green onions. And then that's it. Just process it in your blender or your food processor, and then pour it into a jar and store it in the refrigerator. So this is going to end up being the dressing for the cabbage, and it's going to kind of be like a slaw that goes on top of the tacos, which is really good. But I also use this as just a sauce plain on top of some other tacos that we had during that week, and it was just as good. Definitely, if you like cilantro lime, try that out. Okay, so we're going to finish preparing the Swedish meatball recipe. So I have my cooked potatoes back in my hot pot here. I added a little bit of milk, salt, pepper, and some butter, and I'm just going to give those a good mash until they are all creamy. Mashed potatoes are another thing that reheats fairly well in the oven or microwave if you want to prep them during the weekend. They do tend to be a little bit runnier when you heat them up, so just keep that in mind and make them a little bit stiffer so that they don't get too runny when you reheat them. Now I'm going to make the gravy for the Swedish meatballs. So I just have some butter and some flour in the bottom of my pot, and I'm just going to cook that together, and that will be my thickening agent for the sauce. After that, I'm going to add in some chicken stock, and then I added a little bit of Worcestershire sauce to this. The recipe doesn't call for it, but anytime I've made Swedish meatball recipes before, I find that they always call for Worcestershire sauce, and that to me gives it a beefier flavor, I think. I'm not quite sure if I'm explaining that correctly, but it does make it taste a little bit better. After that was partially thickened, I added in just a 1/4 cup of cream, and that's going to make your gravy a little bit creamier. There was also some salt and pepper in there. So definitely simmer this, put your meatballs back in, definitely taste it to see if it needs more salt, more pepper, season it to your liking. And then this will reheat really well during the week. So I did go ahead and put the meatballs back in, sort of heat them up in the gravy, and then I packed it in a foil pan because, like I said, I was giving this to my grandparents for a meal. I think this whole quarantine Social distancing thing has been hard for them just because, it's hard anyway when you're elderly and you're at home and you're kind of isolated. But I think this time has made it a little bit worse for everyone. And so I've been trying to bring them a meal every couple weeks just to kind of brighten up their spirits. So I packed that up in some foil. I used a little foil divider, and I also sprinkled some parsley on top of the meatballs. So there you go. Creamy mashed potatoes and Swedish meatballs. I really hope that they enjoyed it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I put together the rest of the meal prep for the chorizo potato tacos. And I considered peeling these potatoes before I diced them up. These are the potatoes that I baked in the oven, but I decided to just leave the peeling on and it worked out just fine. So these are totally cool at this point, and I'm just cutting them into a small dice. You do want to try to cut these potatoes into a smaller dice since you're going to be putting these in some corn tortillas for tacos. You don't want large chunks of potato. All right, so I'm going to crisp up those potatoes in a skillet with a little bit of olive oil, remove those, and then we're going to make the spices for the chorizo portion of this recipe. So this isn't necessarily a traditional chorizo, I don't think. This is more of a ground pork that you're going to crisp up in a pan with a little bit of vinegar and spices, and it makes a delicious mixture. I personally am not a huge fan of the Mexican chorizo that comes in the tubes. I think that it tends to be a little bit slimy when you cook it, and it's also very greasy. So Adam and I have tried it before in different recipes. We're not a huge fan of it, so this is definitely a good option for you if you want to try this. It definitely tastes like an authentic chorizo. It just is a little bit less greasy. So I have the rest of my ground pork in my skillet there. I added just a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar and the spices. So for the spices, I used salt, chili powder, paprika, cumin, oregano, and pepper. And then you're just going to cook that in the skillet with the spices and the vinegar until it gets nice and brown and crispy like this. We actually used this for some tacos during the week for lunches, and I also used it to make some chorizo hash and eggs for Adam one morning on the weekend. So after your chorizo is crisped up, or your pork rather, put the potatoes back in, stir it around, give it a taste, see if it needs more salt or anything. Mine did not. It was perfect. Delicious taco filling. I would definitely recommend you guys trying this. So this is the other half of the cabbage that I shredded up, and I'm just putting that in a bowl and adding some of that cilantro lime dressing and stirring that around. And this is what we're going to use to top our tacos with. I'm also going to cut up some limes to go on the side of the tacos. So this is something that I would definitely do ahead of time to save time during the week. And this is how I meal prepped this. So I had a large glass dish with the meat filling. I had a smaller dish with the slaw. Here are the corn tortillas that I used. I used to use the yellow corn tortillas and the Monterey Jack cheese and the limes to go on the side. And then I also wanted to show you guys what it looks like all together. So I added a little bit of extra cilantro on top with a squeeze of lime. These were so good. I would definitely recommend that you try them. Like I said, all of the recipes that I used today are in this cookbook. So if you want to grab it for yourself, head over to that link in my description box and grab it. Okay, so last but not least, we're going to make some chocolate chip banana muffins. The original recipe calls for a glaze. I typically don't make the glaze on top of it, but my kids love mini muffins, and I try not to buy a lot of the times the packaged ones, and so it's easier for me and better for them if I just make them homemade. So I have a little bit of butter in my stand mixer along with some monk fruit sweetener. I decided to use that instead of regular sugar just to cut down on the sugar content in this recipe a little bit. And then I'm going to need 3 bananas. So instead of mashing the bananas separately, I just chose to add them in small chunks to the mixer and sort of mash them up with the butter and sugar mixture. less dishes that way. This original recipe, I've made this before on my channel. It is a skinny taste recipe, and so I can link this recipe down below if you guys want to try it out. My kids love it. I am adding 1/4 cup of applesauce as well as some vanilla, and the original recipe calls for 2 egg whites, but I normally just substitute 1 egg. I'm not super concerned about cutting down on the fat in this recipe. So in order to cut down on waste, I just use 1 egg and it works out just fine. So next I'm adding the dry ingredients, which is flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, and salt. If you want to follow the recipe exactly, you would whisk these together in a separate bowl before adding them. I like to live dangerously, so I typically just add them right to my mixer because ain't nobody got time for that. But at any rate, I'm also going to add some mini chocolate chips, just about 1/2 cup. That's optional, but half a cup distributed throughout all of these muffins isn't going to add a significant amount of sugar, and it makes them taste really delicious. So I have a mini muffin tin here. This one I think I got it from Home Goods, but I love it. It is super non-stick. I don't have to use liners. It makes the perfect size mini muffins. This one is also available on Amazon, so I'll link it down below. I just spray it really generously with some canola oil, and then I use, again, my trusty cookie scoop. That's the same one I use for my meatballs. Obviously, I washed it. And then I'm adding those to the wells of the muffin tin, and these end up being pretty easy to remove once you spray them with the cooking spray. So I make a lot of different varieties of mini muffins. I have a chocolate chip pumpkin muffin recipe that my kids really like. I also make a peanut butter banana muffin recipe, and sometimes I add chocolate chips to that as well. But I just like to keep these on a cake plate in my kitchen, and it's something that my kids can grab for breakfast. And like I said, it makes me feel better knowing that they're homemade. I can control what goes into them rather than buying the prepackaged ones. So I'm going to pop those in the oven and bake them according to the recipe directions. Here is what they look like when they turn out. I think I would have ended up with one more mini muffin had I have paid attention to dividing the batter evenly, but alas, I was one short. But anyway, these, I didn't let them cool quite as long as I should because I had somewhere to go. If I would have let them cool a little bit more, they would have come out of the pan a little bit better. You can see that some of them end up being torn, which is fine. So I just like to remove these and put them on a cooling rack, and then once they're cool, you can store them in a airtight container. I keep them on the counter at room temperature for a couple of days. I would say 3 to 4 days. Just check on them, make sure they don't get moldy, and any that you're not going to use right away, you can definitely freeze, and they turn out really well like that. So here is all of the main dishes that we got accomplished today: the meatballs, egg roll in a bowl, and the chorizo potato tacos. Again, I would so recommend this cookbook. I have really loved cooking out of it. If you guys want to watch more meal prep videos, there are a few here on the right hand side of the screen you can click on. And if you have any other suggestions on what you'd like to see for meal prep videos, please leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.